1,000 subscribers at 40 years old. What's it like to be a 40-year-old collector? So I'm in a unique position to answer this question. I am 40 years old. My YouTube channel just hit 1,000 subscribers. I'm an avid collector, a serious collector. And I've been doing this for a long time. A very long time. And I can tell you that the hobby has changed year to year to year. So there's a couple things here. One, there is a bit of a stigma attached to this. People see all this, and all of a sudden it's man-child, right? People see you collect toys, and they think of immaturity. It is a part of the hobby. There is a stigma attached to what I do. It is inevitable. Case in point, when I walk into a toy store, or just a Target in general, or a Walmart, and I'm waiting for my wife, sometimes I will drop my wife off at, say, a work meeting. Currently, she works at the hospital, and just like tomorrow, there is a meeting that she has to go to that is scheduled from like 6 to 8. What do? We have one car. So I drive her there, I drop her off, I gotta waste 2 hours. Driving all the way home is about ridiculous. So I go find things to do. Sometimes it's as simple as driving out to a Walmart and walking down the toy aisle. But I'll tell you, in the time that I've been doing this, it is very noticeable that sometimes people will get uncomfortable. For me, when I walk into the toy aisle and I'm very blatantly looking at toys, and it can sometimes be very obvious that I'm not buying for somebody else. I'm buying for me. Like, you can see that I'm looking at specific things that I'm recognizing, not looking at things with the intent of, does my kid have that? Is this the next one? Whatever. Or which one would I get? Which one does this kid not have? That's not what I'm doing there. What I'm doing there, very blatantly, is I'm looking at toys. What do they have? What's interesting? Is there an exclusive? What kind of toys do they have? Sometimes just in terms of, what do they have that would have been real cool when I was a kid, even though I personally don't want that toy right now? Like, I don't. But I still like to look at the toys and say, oh man, that would have been real cool to grow up with. Well, loving this hobby the way that I do, you could sometimes tell that somebody's standing in the aisle, and maybe there might be a little kid in the aisle. He might be 7, maybe even as young as 5 years old. Their parents are in the next aisle, and then he walks over to look at action figures. That's where I am. And you'll see sometimes where the parents come around the corner and they see me. And here I am, an older guy, I'm bald, I'm full white beard, I'm looking at toys. Why? Why is this guy alone in the toy aisle right next to my kid? I completely understand where part of that stigma comes from, because I'm telling you right now that if I found something bizarre taking place that seemed odd with an older individual that was surrounding or pertaining to my child, I would be weary, at the very least, protective even. So I understand it. It's not that I don't get why the stigma exists when I walk into the toy aisle. but I really am just there for myself. Now, there are certain parts of this that we can't walk away from. And on the other end, for myself, and this is where things get a little different. I've reached a point I only mildly care. And what do I mean is that every once in a great while, I will walk into the toy aisle. And maybe there'll be a lot of people in the toy aisle. And maybe, for a moment, for a minor moment, I will feel embarrassed that I'm there specifically to look at toys. It does happen. Not very often, though. See, when I was a kid, I loved toys. I did. I found toys to be more impressive than Nintendo. I loved my Nintendo. My dad's Nintendo, to be fair. But I played it. I loved it. And I watched cartoons. But to me, the adventure was never over. When the cartoon was done, when the Nintendo wasn't mine at the time or something of that nature, there were like games to play. There were adventures to have. My imagination never shut down. And that's still true today. Today, I can spend half of my workday, and maybe this is bad, but it's true. I could spend half my workday while I'm picking parts, while I'm transferring things, while I'm banding material, and I'll tell myself stories. I will. I'll think about Conan the Barbarian stories that have never been told. I'll think about D&D campaigns that I never got to run. I'll think about cool adventures and even sometimes continue very old games that I played years ago. I'll sometimes think about continuations to shows that I wish would have happened and so on and so forth. I'll write scenes throughout the course of my day. I don't necessarily copy them down or anything like that. I used to. Sometimes I will consider 5 different really compelling stories that I could write into a D&D campaign for my friends when we have the time to play. It's not very often. It is actually very rare. All these things are constantly going on in my mind. My imagination never left me. It never shut down. That's part of the reason why sometimes on things like when I'm on Fandom night and somebody will ask me to speculate about something, I'll have 5 or 6 different theories as to what's going on or why I feel this way or how I feel they could take it from this point or what you'd have to do to make a story work so that people would actually want to read or be a part of that story. All that stuff is hammering in my head all the time. It never turns off. And because of that, toys were a better outlet for me than anything else. I would watch Star Trek. Then I would play Star Trek. I would play for hours. We had this table downstairs. At my dad's house, we had a table downstairs. And it was a glass table. It was glass with a wood frame. And there were 4, it was split 4. So it was the cross of the table was there, and then there was a area, 4 different glass areas. That was crazy how the camera just all of a sudden cleared up like that. But, so look, I remember I used to go downstairs, and I used to choose the sections. I used to take one section and say, okay, so these are where the walls are, and then build my own little makeshift bridge. And then I had a couple of toys that I thought were cool. I had the shuttle, so I'd move that over, and I put that under. I remember I used to take 2 chairs and push them together and put that down towards the bottom. Right there is where the shuttle bay is. Then I used to take an area and put Jordy and Data and a couple people in there, and I used to kind of make something to be the engine room. I had a transporter. That was one of the toys that I had. One that actually worked where you push the bars and it actually made the guy inside of it disappear. And I would put that in one. Then when I had 4 sections managed, I would play Star Trek. I would be on the ship. I would have my own adventures. I would come across entities that were powerful and situations like that. I had the Enterprise D at the time that I would fly all over the basement and everything. I would beam down to planets that were most often the pool table. There was a pool table in the basement, and oftentimes I would be like, okay, so I'm beaming down to this kind of swampy planet or grassy planet or whatever because of reasons. it never stopped for me. That was endless hours of interest. And yes, I did play alone a lot. I did also have friends that were very into toys. I had like a group, a small group that then got smaller and smaller. Everybody started leaving toys. I was in toys for a long time. Like way longer than I'm almost positive I was supposed to be in toys. Even when I started getting out of toys, I still used them for things like D&D to tell stories. We would start campaigns and I would be like, okay, look at this. This guy's the monster, yada, yada. This is where you are. This is how the dungeons were. You're this guy. You're this guy. Like, we played campaigns and that kept the toys around for a long, long, long time. Then came the time to pack them away. And it did happen. I packed up all the toys. And then I got into doing things that were more my age. We'll call it that. And that's part of the stigma. There came a time when, of course, I started dating. And there was an embarrassment, a humiliation to the hobby that I had. And one that would not have been easily explained. I was writing books at the time when I was in high school. I was writing books. There's a whole story behind that in terms of why I'm not published and I am published. It's a whole story. But sometimes what I would do, in order to guarantee my storylines, I would dig the toys up. I would go into the basement and I would set up an area. If I needed a town to be attacked or something like that, if I was doing a swords and sorcery, I would purposely play that out. I would literally sit down at the table, mark out where houses and things like that were, mark where the hero was, mark where the enemies were, and I'd play it out. I'd be like, all right, this happens, they have a confrontation here, blah, 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 and I'd like do the voices in my head and everything, and sometimes I'd speak out loud and like have the conversations or whatever between the hero group and do a thing, and then after I'd played out the entire scenario, I would kind of reset it from the beginning, put everything in its place, and start writing. And as I wrote, I would move the things. So I'd write and I'd get to the part and I'd kind of set it up so that I could see it. And then I would leave after a couple of hours of writing or whatever. And I'd come back. And when I came back, I didn't have to worry about where I was or think where I was or like have to reread to catch myself up. I could look at my play area and right there, the stuff was in place for what was currently taking place. I'd probably reread the last paragraph, remember where I was, and pick up and keep writing. Now, when I explain it, it makes an interesting amount of sense that I would not be embarrassed by the practice. But back then, I was starting to date girls. And it was very difficult for me sometimes. And I remember this a couple of times. I'd invite some of the guys over, one or two girls over, whatever. We had like a group of people, and we were always trying to bring new people into the group. We had a group that was very much normal, was there all the time. And then, of course, sometimes people would filter in, be them guys or girls, because we were in a dating scene. We would all go and play pool and things like that, play billiards. Sometimes, if everybody wanted to come back to my place to play billiards, we would walk in, and there was this moment of like humiliation and horror when I would realize that I didn't clean my stuff up. So I've still got like G.I. Joes and everything out for something that I happen to be working on. Or sometimes, almost the complete difference, I would make dioramas of sorts, where I would purposely like take the Jeep and like put the Joes in it, and I'd go down to like Hardee's and I'd steal all their straws, like their coffee stirs, and then I'd bring them back home, and I'd go out to the back and I'd put them down on the ground and spray paint a bunch of them green and spray paint a bunch of them red, and then you could kind of like stick them on the end of the barrels of the guns and do, and like I'd create like scenes. I remember this. Well, sometimes I'd be in the middle of doing something like that, and then everybody's going to come over, And then I got these toys sitting around. And I remember losing a lot of toys because, like, I had an older friend, not an older friend, sorry, he was my age, but I had a friend that, like, he didn't know. That's the best way I could explain it. He didn't know that I was still, like, using them, that I still had, like, a mild attachment to my toys. Maybe it wasn't even mild, to be fair. And so I remember, like, he would come over and he would, like, break them. Like, I remember that. There was, like, this one time when, I remember this one, like, a lot, actually, where, like, for some reason that I cannot remember for the life of me, he had, like, a lighter. I know he smoked, but he was, like, burning Spock. I had, like, an original series from that collector's box, Spock. And I remember he, like, burnt his face off and was making jokes about, like, the Melt Man in Action Force or whatever, and in, like, Kablam, the series Kablam. And he, like, destroyed a lot of my toys. He'd break legs off and things like that and laugh. And I remember sitting there with him and kind of doing the same. Laughing, like, yeah. And then, of course, he'd leave and I'd throw 3 or 4 of my toys away. And I remember that didn't feel right to me. It felt wrong. To a point where at some point, I literally packed up everything so that it couldn't be messed with anymore. I locked it all in literal toy chest. Let me reset the camera real quick. But I locked everything away in a toy chest. It was a big green toy chest that I had for years. I put everything in it, and I literally locked it with a padlock. And these were all the toys I had left. A lot of them were Star Wars stuff. Some was Star Trek stuff. A couple random things, like I remember there was like a Darkwing Duck in there. I can't even remember why, but I remember he was in there. And like a bunch of like G.I. Joes, whatever happened to be left over from all the toys that I had over the years. At this point, I had gotten rid of a lot of them. When I locked everything in the toy chest, I remember feeling like, okay, that was it. And I stopped doing all those things I was doing. And part of my creative side did take a massive hit. I remember it became a lot harder to draw. It was like I was suppressing part of myself. It became harder to draw. It became harder to do things like write and things of that nature. And I fell into video games like hard. Like, I'd always played video games, but I mean, that became my one and only outlet for a long time. And these toys sat down there for a very long time. And I got to the point, like I said, gaming kind of took over my life around the PlayStation 2 eras and whatnot. And I remember sometimes I would pack up all my PlayStation 2 stuff. I would get like the PlayStation 2, like 10 games, a couple of remotes, yada yada, put them all in like my backpack, like a big giant backpack, and I'd go all the way up the hill to my buddy's house, and then I'd put it down, and we'd like set up 2 TVs in his basement. We'd hang out all night and play games and stuff like that. One time I did this, and I remember coming back, and I guess the lock on the chest, I'd removed it at some point. I don't remember how or when I had done this, but it happened. The lock was not there. And a younger kid, who we used to have over all the time, a nephew of mine, he was over, and I guess he had decided, they were downstairs, there were toys, they found them, they got in the chest, they got them out, and he played rough. So when I got there, I remember seeing that he'd already broke literally 10 of them easily. Like, they were broken. And I remember being like, I guess that's it. So at that point, I remember I pretty much got rid of all of them. I tossed all of them. I got rid of all my Micro Machine Star Wars stuff. I got rid of some of my old figures. I sold a bunch of stuff. I got rid of Ninja Turtles and all kinds of random things. All gone. And then, of course, got serious with girlfriends, moved on with my life, did a bunch of other stuff, played a whole bunch of video games. And then at some point, I'd had a girlfriend that was pretty serious. Like, she was pretty serious. And I thought we were moving in a direction for marriage. Turns out, no. We had an entire problem that came up. I was cheated on. I'd taken a very serious job, and I was working a lot. I did a lot of overtime, and I had to be awake at 4 o'clock in the morning, like every day. And I had to, because of this, we were at a stage pretty young in our lives where she wanted to do a bunch of stuff. Sometimes I would come home, and I wouldn't even come home till sometimes like 6, 7 o'clock at night. And then she would be like, oh, come on, we should go here or do this or do that. And I'd be like, I can't. Like, I gotta go to sleep here in the next 2 hours. If I'm not asleep by 9, I'm not going to wake up at 4. I'm sorry. I was in a different point in my life than where she currently was in her life. I really think that's what it was. So, not that this makes it right, but it's all stuff that I've dealt with. It's all in the past. I found out that a friend of mine had kind of been stepping in and being like, well, I'll go do things with you. I'll go do things with you. He's got to sleep and everything. They ended up serious while me and her were still together. And then I got the whole, we need to talk. It doesn't work out, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't raise the same deal that I probably should have. I knew what was going on. I had already caught them. I had caught them 2 weeks before this we have to have a conversation thing came up. And I said that it's over. And I knew it. So I knew this conversation was coming because I knew that if she wasn't going to bring it up, I was. I was just kind of waiting for a weekend because I was working like 2 weekends in a row, then getting 1 weekend off. I was waiting for the weekend so that I could basically say my piece. We would pack up her stuff. We would be done with it. That was it. All of this happened, and it played out, and I remember it put me in a real negative space. Like, really negative. My life all of a sudden became work. When I came home, I didn't even want to play games. Like, I had no outlet. And all of a sudden, I remember on a lunch break, I was sitting there and I was watching some stuff on my phone when this guy shows up on my phone. You know, you're watching clips of stuff. This guy shows up on one of the suggested videos, which is kind of crazy. And he's in there with his kid. And he's like in the car. He's filming something in a car, like a pickup video or something like that. And I couldn't, it's crazy that this video even came up. I remember this video. And I remember it was in the suggested, and I watched absolutely nothing that would have caused it to be in this suggested. It's just wild how this played out. All of a sudden in the suggested videos, there's this thing. This guy is sitting there, and he's like, yeah, I went to Walmart with my kids, and I got them this, and got them that, and got them this, and I got me this. And he goes into the bag, and he pulls out a Spider-Man. And he goes, and I remember he says, yeah, that's right. He says, I'm 30 years old and I likes me some Spider-Man. What, you want to fight about it? You ain't got nothing to say. I'm a grown-ass man, pay my own bills, and bought my own Spider-Man. Eat it. And there was something so brazen about this dude that I remember it all just kind of like came rushing back. Like I'd thrown away a part of my imagination. And I was like, I mean, I like Spider-Man. And so that night, I got off work, and before I went home, I drove over to Toys R Us. And I went in, and I just walked up and down the aisles, literally till they were like about to close. Like I just went down up and down every single aisle, and I pulled 6 different items off the shelf. Specifically, one of them that I grabbed was a Spider-Man figure. And I was just like, I'm a grown-ass man. I could buy Spider-Man. I like Spider-Man. And so just like this dude, I did. I bought it. And I took it home. So we've gone from my childhood to my teens to my 20s. Now we're entering into my late 20s, about to be 30s. I start buying toys again. It's a minor thing, but I start buying toys again, and I start putting them like in little areas on my stuff. Like I have like a bookshelf, and I put a couple of my Spider-Men up there and whatnot. And I remember I almost had another moment that kind of drove me out when I met one of my best friends, Proto Guy. You see him all the time on Fandom night. He'd come over, and he came over with his girlfriend and her friend. And it was, at the time, I'm not dating anybody. I just got out of a real bad relationship. And I remember this girl that they came over with, she found one of the Spider-Mans, and she was like, Spider-Man? What? She's like, you got like a kid? And I said, no. And she says, is this like your Spider-Man? And I said, I love Spider-Man. Yeah, that is my Spider-Man. And she goes, yeah, I used to like Spider-Man too. And I was like, used to? And she was like, yeah, but I was like a kid. And she put it back on the shelf. And of course, not in a nice way, very much like, yeah, and just kind of tossed it up there. And then they kind of laughed about it for a little bit and they left. And I remember this was the first moment where it hit me I wasn't going to go backwards at this point. I made a decision. I like this stuff. I don't give a shit. And I told my buddy, I told Proto Guy, as he was leaving, he was like, they were getting their stuff together, they were going to go. And I said, I don't like her. And he goes, yeah, well, why? And I said, because she degraded me for no reason at all. And I realize that now. I don't give a shit if she likes Spider-Man or not. Don't bring her back here. At that point, I started picking stuff up again. And I started dating again. And it was like I also started writing again. And I got a little more serious, and I went into YouTube, and I started doing more YouTube stuff. And Fandom Night started, like Reploid Productions kind of started taking off. And we started having fun, and then we did Fandom Night, and then Fandom Night really did blow up. And then as time went by, I did like I collect videos on those old channels where I was talking about, yeah, I bought this special edition, this and that, and blah, blah, blah. I bought these, these controllers and things of that nature. But like, then came a moment when finally, this is about like around like 34, somewhere in there. I remember saying, this is my space, and I'm going to fill it with whatever I want. Like I was finally over it. I was over it. I just started buying the things that I wanted. And I kept it to a certain degree. I would buy what I wanted, but I would get rid of a lot of stuff. And I was pretty careful how often I bought. And there was reason. During the time, I was doing the Fandom Night shows and everything, and I was housing the filming area. So I was also housing lights, the board, mics, all my space, like my living room and everything like that was basically a recording studio. And then we got, I got the house here and we came here and then this happened and this thing became my filming studio. And one day, my dad got sick. He had an aneurysm. And I walked in that room and that doctor told me, whatever you got to do, whoever you got to call, do it. And I said, like, how serious is this? And he says, look, I'm going to be frank with you. He's got about a 34% chance. And I need to know everything that could or couldn't be something that we're going to run into with complication, because that's going to heighten or lower his chance. At that moment, not that I shouldn't have always had this. At that moment, life changed for me dramatically. Like, it opened the world and said, look, if you want to do a thing, you better do it. Because there's no guarantee. Like, it was basically, and I know I should have always known this. Like, it's not like this should have just slapped me in the face the way it did, but it's different when it's your dad. Like, all of a sudden, we went from talking the night before to he woke up and he had like a stomach ache, and it was way worse than a stomach ache. And at that moment, man, that was it. Like, I remember I started just buying, I got really into this. And I changed a lot of stuff. My dad is fine, by the way. I changed a lot of stuff. I basically opened the floodgates back up and said, I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm done. I'm going to do what I want to do. I brought a whole bunch of stuff in. And I started packing the room, and I started getting into properties that I'd always kind of avoided. I watched He-Man. I bought Barbarians. I started reading Conan again. I started collecting Dragon Ball Z figures and opening up my superhero knowledge again and putting all the Star Trek back on the shelf and expanding this room to the point that it is now. And I refocused my YouTube to talk about something that had been in my life my whole life. Toys. And that is where the direction came from, to drop all the stuff that I was doing and go back to something I had always cared about but left behind. I dug a lot of stuff out of storage. I put a lot of stuff on the shelf that I basically packed away for years. I talked about as much as I can. I'm buying all the time. I'm discussing it. I sell parts of the collection that I feel I'm done with that somebody else would enjoy. I reopened. And I started taking certain things very seriously. Like when I play a video game now, I don't care about the newest video game. I care about what interests me at the moment. And I play it. Done. I don't care about what's new. I don't care about what's shiny. I don't care about, difficulty settings and things like that. Sometimes I just want to play something and I want to play it easy and I just want to beat the game and that's what I want to do, and then I want to get back to what I'm doing here. I started putting a lot of time into this and everything. And at that moment, a lot of things changed for me and I stopped caring. Now, as I said, there is a stigma attached to what I do. But even at my job, I will tell people I'm an adult collector. I collect toys. I like them. I don't give a shit. At 40 years old, the stigma has lifted completely on my side. It still exists. I'm still very honest about what's going on. But I have a Grizzlor right here. And I'm going to open it. And he's going to be fuzzy. And it's going to be awesome. And I'm going to enjoy it. And I'm going to put him on my shelf. And I'm going to have a grizzly man creature. And I don't give a crap what it means to anybody else, as long as it means something to me. So, what is it like to be a 40-year-old collector? The question The answer is different for everybody. That's true. But I would tell you that my life with toys and the experiences and the letting it go and the being ashamed and the being embarrassed and the toy hunts and the things of that nature and the way you get looked at sometimes when you're interested in buying a Star Trek toy, there is a point where you either get over it, and I'm there. At 40 years old, I don't care. Life is short. And sometimes, just like people drink, just like people smoke, just like people get high, just like people are adrenaline junkies, just like people are travel junkies, everybody has something. Some people hyper-focus into sports. They can tell you everything. Some people shoot guns. Some people, they draw. Everybody has something. Coming to terms with that changed a lot of this for me. And 40 years old, it's no longer an issue. It is noticeable because I'm 40 years old and I'm on YouTube and I just hit 1K. And if you really stop and think about that, there's a lot of YouTube. A lot of people are young. That's not a critique. It's not a negative critique. It is what it is. People get in. Young people start making content. The young people that are watching find that content. It explodes. It becomes a thing. And sometimes, when you're looking for people that are collecting and into lines like this and whatnot, sometimes if you want somebody to talk about your Marvel Legends stuff, you might be looking for a younger guy, right? I get that. So sometimes I know that some of my videos, they get in there, they see that I'm an older guy, maybe they move on. They look for somebody younger, somebody that's going to speak to them at their level or whatever. But I will say this, because of the way that I structure the show, as a 40-year-old man, I have a lot of stories to tell. Like, when I pick up a Fantastic Four figure, there's a lot of stuff that floods my mind that I want to talk about. When I pick up a Grizzlor, there's a lot of stuff that floods my mind that I want to talk about. When I pick up the best Batman there is, right there, when I pick up the best Batman ever and put him on the shelf, I can have a 20-minute conversation inside of that video about what Batman means to me, when he's the best, when he's the worst, when I like to read him and when I don't like to read him, and why all that stuff compounds and means something to me and gives me the reason to buy it beyond, I likes Batman. I had 1,000 stories to tell. And I think, in some ways, that is also a benefit. Because I do think that my toy videos are different from a lot of other people that are simply just reviewing the toy. They move like this. They look like this. Cool, huh? I don't know. I find there to be more passion in the subject than how they move. And that is part of what keeps me doing what I'm currently doing. 40-year-old toy collector. And that is what it's like. Thank you for pushing me up to 1K, and we'll see where we go from here on. I appreciate it. I really do. Comments in the section below. I'll talk to everybody later.
I have spoken. Take what you will from it.